teen killers who faced the death penalty, the shocking truth behind their sentences, the girl who took it too far. The courtroom was silent except for the steady hum of fluorescent lights. Cameras flashed as 19-year-old Christa Pike stood in her orange jumpsuit, her hands trembling while the judge read the verdict. The world would soon know her name, not as a college student, but as the youngest woman sentenced to death in modern Tennessee history. Christa's story began in January 1995 on the quiet campus of the University of Tennessee's Job Corps program. Those who knew her described her as restless, charming, and dangerously impulsive. Beneath her shy smile was a deep streak of jealousy, especially toward another student, Colleen Slemmer, a kind-hearted classmate who, Christa believed, was trying to steal her boyfriend, Tadderell's ship. That belief became an obsession. Over the following weeks, Christa's conversations with Tadderell turned darker. She started talking about teaching Colleen a lesson. Friends dismissed it as teenage drama, until January 12, 1995, when Christa convinced Colleen to take a walk with her into the wooded area behind campus. Colleen never returned. According to investigators, Christa and Tadderell ambushed her in the woods. A third friend, Shadala Peterson, stayed back, too afraid to intervene. What happened next would shock Knoxville for decades. Christa's anger spiraled into cruelty. She struck Colleen with a heavy chunk of asphalt and continued the assault until there was nothing left but silence in the trees. When police later searched Christa's dorm room, they discovered a folded napkin tucked into her jacket pocket. Inside it was a small fragment of bone, a piece of Colleen's skull. To Christa, it was a souvenir. To investigators, it was undeniable evidence of guilt. Christa's confession stunned even seasoned detectives. She spoke with chilling clarity, showing flashes of remorse before quickly returning to indifference. "I knew what I was doing," she said during her interrogation. "I was angry, and I took it out on her." At trial, the defense described a troubled childhood filled with neglect and abuse. But the jury wasn't convinced. They saw a young woman who planned, executed, and bragged about a killing. When the judge read the sentence, death by electrocution, Christa began to cry for the first time since her arrest. "May God have mercy on your soul," the judge said as the courtroom echoed with gasps. Her boyfriend, Tadderell, was spared the death penalty due to his age and received life in prison with the possibility of parole. Shadala was sentenced to 6 years for her role as an accessory. Nearly 3 decades later, Christa Pike remains the youngest woman on death row in America. She has appealed her sentence multiple times, all denied. To this day, Colleen's family says they still struggle with the reality of losing their daughter in such a senseless act of envy. In interviews, one juror admitted, "I've seen terrible things, but this was pure darkness hiding in a teenage face." And yet, Christa's case was just the beginning. Across the United States, a chilling pattern emerged, young offenders committing crimes once thought possible only for hardened adults. What drives a teenager to commit the unthinkable? Is it rage, trauma, or something far deeper? The next story would raise that same question, and deliver an even more disturbing answer: the gang oath. When 17-year-old Pedro Espinoza walked into the California courtroom, the air was thick with anger and grief. Reporters filled every bench. Across from him sat a family whose lives he had shattered, the parents of Jazz Shaw, a promising high school athlete who dreamed of playing college football. Pedro kept his head down. Tattoos inked across his neck told the story of his allegiance, the 18th Street Gang, one of Los Angeles's most notorious crews. But nothing could explain why he pulled the trigger that day, or why a teenager already on probation decided to take another young life over something as meaningless as a color. It happened on a quiet March afternoon in 2008. Jazz was walking home, chatting on the phone with his girlfriend. In his backpack, he carried textbooks and a red gym bag, a color that would seal his fate. From across the street, Pedro and his fellow gang members spotted him. They mistook the red for rival gang colors. Moments later, a single shot rang out. Witnesses said Pedro didn't hesitate. He raised the gun, fired once into Jazz's chest, and disappeared into the alley before anyone could react. The boy collapsed on the sidewalk, the phone still in his hand. His girlfriend, still on the call, heard his last breath. The city erupted in outrage. Jazz wasn't a gang member. He was a student athlete, disciplined, loved, and respected. His mother, an army sergeant, called it a war crime on our own streets. Police arrested Pedro 2 days later. He had just been released from juvenile detention for an earlier assault. This time, prosecutors promised there would be no second chances. During the trial, the courtroom listened to haunting testimony from witnesses, gang members, and even Pedro's own relatives. His cousin revealed that Pedro bragged about the shooting, calling it a message. The defense tried to argue he was trapped in a violent culture, that poverty and fear shaped his choices. But the prosecution painted a simpler picture, a boy who wanted to prove himself as a killer. When Jazz's mother took the stand, her words silenced the room. "I can't forgive you," she said through tears. "I wear my son's dog tags every day. You took my soldier." Pedro showed no emotion. Not when the verdict was read. Not when the judge looked him in the eyes and said, "You will die in San Quentin prison, by the order of this court." Outside, Jazz's father told reporters, "He didn't just kill my son. He killed our peace." Pedro Espinoza joined the long list of teens sentenced to die before ever reaching adulthood. His case became a rallying cry for tougher gang laws and stricter juvenile sentencing. But it also reignited a moral question: should a teenager be executed for a crime committed before his brain was fully formed? Decades of research say young offenders think impulsively, crave belonging, and struggle with empathy, all the perfect tools for gang manipulation. Yet families like the Shaws argue that justice must still be served. Even now, Pedro sits on death row in California, his appeals running thin. He's older, quieter, and reportedly spends his days reading law books and writing letters to the very people he once called enemies. But forgiveness, like freedom, isn't guaranteed. As one detective later said, he was 17 going on 30, a boy who thought a gun would make him a man. And just when the nation thought it had seen the depths of youth violence, another story emerged, one that would redefine what rage inside a family could look like. A man named Marlon Joseph, and the night he destroyed everything he claimed to love, when blood turns on blood. The Florida sun was setting when Marlon Joseph's mother stood outside her home, holding the phone with trembling hands. Her voice cracked as she begged her son to surrender. "Marlon, please, just turn yourself in. You know I love you, but you have to do this." Her voice echoed across a neighborhood that had already fallen into panic. Hours earlier, 2 lives had been taken inside that very house, a mother and her 11-year-old daughter, both shot in a fit of fury that no one could comprehend. A house divided. It began on December 28, 2017. Inside a modest West Palm Beach home, an argument had been brewing for days. Marlon, a 29-year-old father, had recently moved in with his girlfriend, Khaleda Crowell, and her daughter, Kyra Inglet. According to police reports, tension grew after Marlon's own daughter had an argument with Kyra, an ordinary disagreement between children that should have ended there. But Marlon's temper was far from ordinary. By evening, he was pacing the house, muttering about respect, about people taking sides. Then, without warning, he grabbed his gun. Neighbors later told investigators they heard shouting, then a series of sharp cracks, the unmistakable sound of gunfire. Khaleda was struck first. As she fell, 11-year-old Kyra screamed and ran for the door. Marlon chased her down the hallway and pulled the trigger again. The silence that followed was the kind that freezes time. The search. For 2 days, Marlon vanished. Police helicopters circled the skies, while family and friends pleaded for him to come home alive. On the 3rd day, officers spotted him near an abandoned lot. He surrendered quietly, hands raised, his face blank. When detectives asked why he did it, his answer was chilling in its simplicity. "I just lost it. No drugs. No alcohol. Just rage and a gun." The trial. In court, Marlon sat motionless as prosecutors described how an 11-year-old girl had watched her mother die before trying to flee for her own life. The judge's voice trembled as he read the jury's recommendation, death. "You have not only forfeited your right to live among us," he said, "but under the law of this state, you have forfeited your right to live at all." Family members wept in silence. Even the courtroom guards looked shaken. When the sentence was finalized, Marlon finally spoke. "Tell my daughter I'm sorry." But there was no comfort in those words. For the victims' families, it wasn't enough. "He didn't just kill them," one relative said. "He killed every memory tied to that house." The bigger picture. Marlon's case reignited a national debate. How does someone so young, with a family of his own, cross the line into irreversible violence? Psychologists described him as a man with emotional detachment, a lack of impulse control, and explosive reactivity. But to the public, labels didn't matter. The horror was already done. Today, Marlon Joseph waits on death row in Florida. His appeals, like those before him, are slowly being denied. The same walls that once held other infamous killers now hold him, another reminder of how quickly a moment of rage can erase a lifetime of humanity. Epilogue: The Cycle of Youth and Death. From Christa Pike, to Pedro Espinoza, to Marlon Joseph, the pattern is hauntingly clear. Youth doesn't always equal innocence. In every case, they believed they were justified. Each convinced themselves they were right, until the cell doors closed behind them. A judge once said, "I've seen killers twice their age show more fear." These kids weren't scared, they were empty. It's a darkness that continues to puzzle the world, how people so young can carry so much hate, and how a single moment can turn a heartbeat into a headline.